Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of DailyDead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James, and today I am joined by Bryan Christopher. We're going to be talking about Stranger Things 4, Volume 2. We're talking about Revealer, Umbrella Academy, and Only Murders in the Building. We started, I think it was 2 episodes ago, talking about my thoughts on Stranger Things because they split it up. Netflix is not officially going episodic, but they're breaking things up in a way that makes it more episodic. So even though the episodes were completed, we got Stranger Things 4, Volume 1 and Volume 2. I believe it was 8 episodes in the front and then a final 2 in the back. I think the interesting thing about Volume 2, which just came out a few days ago, is that one episode is 90 minutes and another episode is 2.5 hours. Mm-hmm. So you kind of get like 2 Stranger Things movies for those of you that love it. For those of you that are only okay with Stranger Things, you get 2 Stranger Things movies. And so, I think that that kind of leads into maybe some of my qualms with it, which is that it's a little long, and but I'm happy to see, the Duffer Brothers have kind of taken lead on directing. They directed the what do you call it, season premiere. They directed the season finale, and they directed some of the other episodes in between. But it's kind of interesting to see, them kind of flex their muscle more and take. Sometimes you'll see this where this will happen, where more people involved in the show will start, directing episodes, and it doesn't always work. But it's interesting to see that there hasn't really been that much of a quality hit. As I said, for the first half, if you kind of like Stranger Things, the first 3 seasons, you're going to get more of, the same in season 4. And for me, that's a good thing. I kind of like where they're taking it. I like where they've taken the story. As I mentioned before, it feels like, even though there's some familiar beats, it feels like they're making it their own. And so I like that. I think they're not leaning in on the nostalgia factor too much. And I felt like this definitely hit that kind of like Amblin sweet spot they're going for. There's like, it's not made for kids. It's made for all ages. So it goes pretty heavy hitting in some cases. And so there are some maybe more direct, as I said, there weren't too many, but there may be some more direct, like Nightmare on Elm Street homages. And of course, Robert Englund was in the first volume of this season. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, I like where it's going. I think some people thought that this was the end. I've heard from multiple people that thought that this was the end of the series, but there is one more season coming up. But yeah,
I've seen like a teaser poster, but I couldn't tell if that was an official poster or if that was like some fan art. But it says like 2024 for the final season. I don't know if there's anything official on that.
I'm actually not sure. I've seen some fan stuff too, so I'm not completely sure if that's what it was. I don't know if they've specified exactly when it's going to come out. I know they talked about potentially doing a time jump because these kids are getting older. Mm-hmm. Some of them are in their 30s now. I think so.
Really?
Yeah, there's one of I think Steve is like 30, and he was meant to be just a couple of years older than them. And so yeah, I think he just hit 30. Yeah, but I mean, I've enjoyed where they've gone with it. It's kind of been fun to see them play in this like world of like what happens if like Scanners meets Freddy Krueger, and then kind of do their own thing with it. I've heard a lot of different complaints about it from the fact that it's not accurate to the 80s. I've heard some, and that's legitimate. And I've also heard some, very legitimate concerns in terms of, characters that are or are not getting focus, LGBTQ representation, how they portray Black characters. So this isn't, definitely isn't a show without its flaws or criticisms. It seems like they're, especially, I guess I'll mention like on the LGBTQ angle, they are playing with that like a little bit more. And it seems like it's a through line with one of the characters. And I'm trying not to spoil things for people that are, that haven't seen it. But I think there's a through line that hopefully will have some payoff and some it won't be undertones. It should just be there by the time the story's all said and done. But with us having still one season to go, it's a little hard to see how all these are going to connect yet.
It does seem like they're being a little coy with that from what I've heard. And without getting too much into, for those who heard when we talked about the first half of season 4, I already kind of went off on my curmudgeonly rant about Stranger Things, so I'm not going to make everybody sit through that again. Suffice to say that there are other areas where I have more interest, even on Netflix. But couple of things. It does sound like they are, like, one of my main complaints about Stranger Things is that for me it leaned too hard into the nostalgia, but I am hearing they're Jonathan, you just said they're kind of pulling away from that, and I heard they've kind of come into their own, especially this season. So I'm conflicted, because part of me does want to see what this is about now, but then that means I have to go through, I think I stopped at the end of season 2, so I don't know if I'm up for catching up on 2 seasons of this, but I don't know, maybe at some point I will. I am interested, I would really love to know what went behind the decision of doing, what was it, 6 episodes for volume 1 and then just 2 episodes for the final 2. Have you heard anything about, I know Netflix is usually pretty vague about their rationale for that kind of stuff, but
it's pure speculation on my part. I think it's a double dip. I think it's a ratings double dip. And again, just speculation. I'm not saying that this is what it was. State that ahead of time. And the reason is because there had been talk, especially, with some of their other series orders for ones that weren't where they had partnerships with Marvel and stuff like that, again, allegedly Netflix had been pushing for smaller episode orders instead of having, like we'd see on a traditional network, when we'd see a TV show, like if you watch them, I don't know, like Grey's Anatomy or a long-standing show, right? There's 20 episodes a season. Netflix doesn't want to do that because you're going to binge it all, and then they've spent all that money on 20 when you might just be happy with 6 or 8. And so we've seen smaller seasons like for Sabrina, and then we've also seen them kind of split things up. And, for some of the other shows, I don't know, for on Disney, they did it episodic, and there's a couple benefits to that. One is that you kind of have that quote unquote water cooler talk. So every week your show's kind of getting remarketed and people are talking about that big moment, where that doesn't happen with Netflix. And then the other thing, the very real world piece of it, is that if you have a subscription system and someone's there for 8 episodes, you have them for 2 months. As opposed to, if you binge something on Netflix in 1 month, that's it.
And I guess that's my curiosity isn't why they broke it up into 2. It's why they didn't break it up into more. They seem very hesitant to do full on episodic releases. But I felt with Fear Street, that was an example for me of that really working for them, because it allowed for that word of mouth to start picking up. I'd be surprised to learn that they didn't grow an audience throughout those 3 weeks. So I don't know. I think it's a little confusing as to why they wouldn't do something similar to that. Maybe not do 1 episode a week, but maybe do bundles of but at least stretch it out over 4 weeks. It just seems very odd to split it up, but only to do it in such an uneven way. When I think they could build that, kind of bring back that water cooler talk, quote unquote, if they would do it a little bit more periodically episodic.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the thing about Fear Street is that it was an anomaly. They had acquired 3, or originally meant to be 3 theatrical releases from Fox, from the production company that was working with Fox. They had, I believe they had an out clause where once Fox got purchased by Disney, they had an option to take it somewhere else. And so Netflix had, the opportunity to release, 3 movies and make it a big event. But I think that did kind of prove out that it can work. So I'm with you. I'm okay if they have, they break up Stranger Things or any of their shows into smaller chunks.
I didn't realize how much I had missed episodic episodic episodes. I didn't realize how much I'd missed episodic television until I actually don't would it have been Hulu or Disney Plus that first brought that back. But it's nice to go back to like having things to look forward to, each week rather than just kind of like get through it in a weekend and then have to wait until, however long it takes for the next season to come out.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I do like the social aspects of it, and I do like that anticipation. Because it's like, just talking to your friends or family about, oh, did you see this? Or, oh, you got to watch this episode. And then kind of being able to dissect the episode or like talk about what's coming next, or like there's more of an analysis on a per episode basis. And I do like that. And I think also you can design your storytelling maybe in a more captivating way. And maybe there's a plus and minus if you're a creator, right? And it kind of works maybe that way with comic books, right? If somebody's going to make a graphic novel versus, 4 or 5 individual issues, it's different because you need a hook at the end of every issue. Otherwise people aren't going to buy the next one. And I think you have a real worry about that too with the weekly release format. Is it like, oh, maybe we'll lose them after the first couple. I guess maybe Netflix should just give people the option to, or maybe give creators, maybe that's the best way. I always tend to default to the creators. If a creator wants a bingeable or like just a one-time binge show, they should be able to release it. And if somebody else wants to like plan for an event or break it up, I think they should maybe be more willing to do that.
It's also weird too, because I do feel like there are some shows that are better, not necessarily binged, but like done at your own pace. Like for me, Midnight Mass, I liked being able to kind of do that in chunks at my own pace rather than, have it come out on a week by week basis. But I guess also the flip side of that, you could say, is that if you do it episodic, if you're someone who likes to binge, you just wait till it's done. But then I guess
you could just binge it anyway.
The flip side of that is then you have to you're dodging spoilers for a much more extended period of time.
Yeah.
So, I guess either way, any way you do it, it kind of turns into a double-edged sword. But yeah, I don't know, like with something like this, something that is clearly becoming like event television for Netflix, or it's been event television. If they're trying to do that double dip, I feel like that's spreading it out over the course of a few weeks seems to be the way to do that. But I'm sure they have a lot of smart people telling them why to do it this way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think before too, it was a competitive advantage. And now though the other streaming services are doing weekly, it's seeming like it may not be the advantage it once was. And actually in some cases too can hurt them in some ways. So, I mean, there's always, as you mentioned, you can always just wait, a few weeks and then, binge it. It's the binging is only like the lack of being able to binge is only a problem for those, first, 8 weeks. But yeah, it's interesting.
And it's like, it's not like you need to wait for it to come out on DVD or something like that.
Yeah.
What used to be the case with TV, where you would see a season of television, but you couldn't binge it until Lord knows, even probably a year later when the DVD came out. Here, it's just wait till it gets to the end and you can dig in right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Pre-TiVo, when you had to get when you needed the tape ready so you could hit record, you had to physically be there.
And then have a wall of VHS tapes.
Yeah. On what was, I can't remember what it is whatever the different settings. There's like SPLP, SLP, but whatever it was, so that you could have your 6-hour tape. I had a lot of those. I taped like the Twilight Zone marathons back in the day. So I had all these VHS sci-fi tapes.
I remember distinctly having some kind of setup where I don't know how, but we were able to record off of HBO, which I feel like couldn't have been legal. But I don't think neither of my parents were tech savvy enough to been able to hack the VCR. So I guess it just worked. But we had definitely I think the one I wore out, if we're talking about 80s nostalgia, I remember I had a recording of Lost Boys that I think we actually broke the tape from watching it too many times.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was nothing, as far as I remember, there was nothing stopping you from taping it. Like you could tape anything you could pull on your TV, you could record, whether it was HBO or whether it was just, the news. So those were good. I don't know. I mean, I think as long as you, and I'm not too clear on this, but I know everybody did. Like as long as you recorded it and like kept it personally, that was like the rule of thumb. Like it would be different if you like took it from HBO and started selling it or were like showing it to the public.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was all for us. We were ordering those for our own use.
Yep. Yeah, I had so many tapes. I actually found some recently in my parents' basement. I'm trying to think of what I found in there. I found an old Bond movie. I found an Alien, like Alien 3, I think I found.
Oh, so a happy-go-lucky installment.
Yeah, exactly. I was happy to find it. Yeah, I have a little VHS wall. I don't watch. I know some people do. I don't have problems with it. It sounds like I'm complaining, but I know some people will watch VHS tapes, and I know a few people. We have friends of ours that like they'll pop them in. I purely have them for like aesthetic reasons, but I do have like a VHS, just a tiny VHS wall in the basement with some of the ones that we kept.
Yeah, I don't know if, I know some people do, but I don't know that VHS will ever have the same resurgence that like vinyl had for music, where, they make a full on comeback, and there's people who like that, that vintage quality to vinyl. I feel like VHS, like that's not a 1-to-1 comparison.
The only thing is, and I'm probably who's been listening is probably gonna be like, you're contradicting yourself, Jonathan, because I probably said the opposite of this a couple of years ago, but your opinion change, you learn more. And so now we evolve. And so I think there is a case. It still may not get me to watch it, but I think the case I could make for the VHS tapes is that like that grain and that quality, like some of the practical effects for horror movies were designed not thinking that we'd be in 4K. Mm-hmm. And so some of that
seams show quite a little bit more on 4K.
So some of that movie magic is kind of lost. So you may want to watch some. I can imagine wanting to see some horror movies on VHS because you want to see them how most people saw them, and that I can get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me it would be like more of just like a novelty thing. The novelty of going through that whole process and just feeling like a 7-year-old kid again, especially when you need to like, flip up the lid and blow into the thing because it's not working correctly. Like I don't see myself being like a long-term VHS like collector and user.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things actually that comes to mind is Hellraiser, the creature at the end that's chasing Kirsty down the hallway. It's got the wheels. You can see the wheels. The
dolly. Oh yeah, you can see the people behind it pushing it down the hallway.
But I don't think you could see it on VHS, or at least it's much more difficult, I would imagine.
It probably just blends in with the rest of whatever contraptions are flying around with that thing. But yeah, when you see it in high resolution, it's like, oh, there they are.
They're right there. Yeah.
Movie magic. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess to wrap up Stranger Things, because I didn't really give a definitive whether I liked it or not. I did like where they went with season 4. I like how they ended it for the most part. I feel like because it's a 2.5-hour episode and the Duffer Brothers were like writing and directing it, and they're the creative force behind the show, it's bloated. And how okay you are with that depends on how much you like Stranger Things. For me, and my wife Christy was watching it, she liked a lot of some of these extra scenes because it was like there was like wrap up and there's like some extra character development, but also like from a like creative standpoint, I'm looking at this, I'm like, they probably could have cut 45 minutes out of this and it would have still ended the same way. And so it's kind of a bit of preference there, but I feel like most of the things they set out to do, they did. They've set everything up for a big season 5 finale, and And yeah, I'm excited for it, and I've enjoyed what they've done with it. And they announced that the Duffer Brothers just recently created Upside Down Productions. They're going to be doing a Stranger Things spinoff, Stephen King's A Talisman. They're doing a TV show from the new Dark Crystal team, and they're doing an adaptation of Death Note. Adam Wingard recently did a Death Note movie for Netflix, a few years back, but they're going to be doing a new version of live action of a Death Note. So I'm curious to see where that goes.
Yeah. Interesting that they kind of keep doing these iterations of Death Note. I don't know. Maybe they just feel like they didn't get the first one right because I know that I think it was kind of like mixed reviews on Wingard's version. So be interesting to see, have they said, is it going to be a movie? Is it going to be a series?
It seems like it's going to be a series.
Okay.
And yeah, I love the Death Note anime. If you haven't seen it, watch it. Manga's great. I haven't seen, there's a Japanese movie series, haven't seen it. And I haven't seen the Wingard movie. So I haven't not seen it in live action. I think it could be done really well. I think, hopefully things like Squid Game have proven that you don't need an American cast. So I would love to see a Japanese cast for this. I think that would be awesome. We've learned from things like, Ghost in the Shell, like don't do it. And so I would love to see that. I don't think we're necessarily going to get that, but I think it would be pretty cool if they remained really faithful to some of the source material. But also, that's, and as I seem to go back and forth though, there are some cases where, source material works for anime or it works for manga and you do have to change the story. But I think you can keep a Japanese cast.
I mean, at least you'd have people, even if you're doing it in America, you could have people of Japanese descent or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we'll see where they go with it, but I'm curious because it's a cool story. I don't know if you've seen the anime. It's worth watching the anime.
I've seen the first probably half of the anime, which means I've seen about like 57 episodes of it because that is a long ass anime. It's also one of those things too where like I think it's only like 2 or 3 seasons, but if I remember correctly, like each season had like 30 or like 40 episodes in it. Like it's there's a lot of content in that one.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I don't even remember how many episodes because I kind of just binged it. And talking about binging, but I just binged it, and yeah, I don't recall. I know how it all goes. I know how it ends, but I don't remember how many episodes it takes to get there.
I do remember I had a little trouble with part of the reason I fell off was because it kind of had that same thing for me as Dexter had, where it turns into like, okay, is this going to be the week where they figure it out? Close, but no. Okay, is this going to be the week where they figure it out? Close, but no. And just for slight context on that, for anyone who's not familiar with Death Note, it's this kid who finds a journal where if you write someone's name in and how they die, they will die that way. He kind of turns into this kind of weird, I don't know, like a zealot / vigilante, and kind of decides to take things into his own hands. He gets hunted down, or he's kind of being investigated by this like really kind of over the top and quirky investigator, and it's literally just a cat and mouse of them, but it's over like a few dozen episodes. So for me, it got a little bit like, okay, I get it. We like there's a certain point to which it's like I'm that person who always like wants to like, okay, let's move the narrative along. So it's probably that same thing as like, with Stranger Things, like you were talking about how Christy enjoyed those character steps and being able to kind of flesh those out. So if it's a world you really like living in, you'll probably really dig it. But if you're anything like me, it'll be like, okay, I get the point. Let's move on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and there is a good bit of that. Dexter is actually what, when I was thinking about it, was what I would definitely like in at least the first third too. Then the story kind of really escalates, and once it escalates, it still has that element, but just on a different scale, and an interesting scale you rarely see in live action. That's one reason why I'm kind of interested to see to see it.
Be interested to see where it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's move on. We're going to talk about, we got a few things to talk about today. So we're going to talk about Revealer. It's on Shudder now. It's directed by Luke Boyce. It's written by Tim Seeley and Michael Morrissey. And, if you're Daily Dead readers, you have probably heard both of those names because they are on top of, writing other, writing books and being involved in other properties. They're known as comic book writers. And Tim Seeley for Hack Slash. Michael Morrissey is doing Barbaric, which is a pretty cool comic that's in its second volume now, and it's kind of like it would be like in the world of Conan, but his axe like talks and like drinks blood, and it's like to keep him on the right path, like he has to hunt down like evildoers, and he's like cursed to do it, and it's pretty cool. So anyway, some guys with some pretty cool horror creds in terms of comic books are moving into the big screen.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because as soon as you mentioned that they were comic book writers, I could fully see this as having been a graphic novel first. I don't think it was. It sounds like this was, an original screenplay, but this is kind of one of those things where the beats and the way it plays out, I could see this playing out on the panels of a comic book. And this is I was playing with fire a little bit on this one, because I literally finished watching it about a half an hour before we recorded.
So you pulled a Derek?
I did indeed. And that's usually a risky proposition for me, because I think we're both the same way, Jonathan. Like, we usually like to have something swirl around in our heads a little bit.
Yeah, I need a little bit of time.
But this one, I'll admit, this one was pretty straightforward. I liked it. I really did like it. So it's this stripper named Angie. She works at kind of one of those, not even a strip club. It's one of those kind of adult bookstores that has like booths in the back where, you can put money in, and someone on the other side of plexiglass will do a little show for you. And she is kind of, you meet her as she's going in for a day of work. She's being confronted by a pack of, kind of right-wing kooks, who led by another woman named Sally, who you can tell they've had this kind of contentious relationship for a while. Sally and her folks have been out kind of giving her a hard time for so long. They're almost fighting like an old married couple at this point. Angie is very kind of like standoffish and very prickly. And she kind of goes in for her day of work, and just so happens that the apocalypse has started on this day as well. It's interesting because it's one of those movies that posits like, what if the kind of the right-wing crackpots are right? Because this is a very, Judeo-Christian apocalypse. This is the the trumpets. You don't quite get the four horsemen, but I think that was just a budget issue more than anything else. But yeah, this is a very biblical apocalypse. But within that, they make these characters. This isn't the most subtle of movies, but they do give these characters more than. It's hard to explain because they're certainly tropey in a lot of ways, between Angie and Sally, and kind of what you learn about their backstories. But it's this is all basically an opportunity for them to learn more about each other than kind of what they see on the surface. And this is, I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to like shatter the world or anything like that. I don't know that it's necessarily even trying that. It's a fairly small movie. I actually would compare it in terms of some of the things it's doing to Pontypool, in that it is hinting at kind of these big, grand, epic things going on outside the room, but the actual movie itself is set in a very small setting. It's kind of that way that you work with telling a grand story with maybe not having so much of a grand budget. So it's nothing that's going to upturn the genre or anything like that, but I thought it was pretty effective. I enjoyed it for what they were doing.
Yeah, I'm always interested in the like. It's not a one room movie, but it's sort of a one room movie because I think it's a great,
It might as well be a one
opportunity.
movie. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's a great opportunity for filmmakers to kind of, prove themselves, put together a kind of a tight concept to keep somebody's interest, for the 90-minute runtime, and yeah, and I think for the most part this worked. I really did like the you mentioned kind of like what if those Christian zealots were right, but I also like that. I'll give a light spoiler warning. I don't think it's a spoiler, but somebody might say it. But anyway, I like that they're right, sort of, but that like the evil isn't like the evil coming from hell if you don't, what do you call it? If you're a sinner, it's more like that these like that the end of days is coming, but this is like it is kind of like what do you call it? Like heaven sent. You know what I mean? Um,
And it's also I'm making a few kind of comparisons at this point, but another thing that it kind of reminded me of in that vein is 10 Cloverfield Lane, where you have that doomsday prepper in John Goodman's character who turns out to be right, but that doesn't mean he's not also a crazy asshole.
yeah,
So it's questioning that you might be right in terms of like the situation of what's going on, but the takeaways that you're taking away from that aren't necessarily correct.
yeah, yeah. And I also like that the like solve for this wasn't like let's dig into like the Bible and figure it out. Let's use holy water because I do think it's interesting because we talk about and we've talked about here and of course many people have this conversation, but about how the importance of diverse voices and and it goes when it comes to religion as well and how we portray that because so and of course like if you look at like I mean obviously you have The Exorcist and you have The Omen and stuff like that. I mean these are considered like the pinnacle of horror in many cases, so like it's okay to to follow to have essentially like Christian horror, but I kind of see the other side of it. I'm interested in kind of getting more of that because we have The Conjuring too, which is very very what do you call it like Christian centric, like using the Bible and using the holy water and using that to solve your problems. So I think to me in some cases it's scarier to deal with the other side, which is that these things that people believe or these things that you've been taught are supposed to work. Like no, they don't.
Yeah, I mean this isn't a movie where your uh zealotry will reward you in the end. Like, one of these characters is very much a religious zealot and she finds herself caught in the apocalypse anyway. And I don't want to get too much into the rationale or not the ration, but the reasoning behind what that is, because it's a fairly major spoiler. But I think if there's a takeaway at the end of this movie, it's kind of more the way you get through this is being true to yourself, and that might come across as kind of a trite moral to an apocalypse story. But I found that, for whatever this movie lacked in nuance, and there's a couple things that, we're a little bit tired. Like, for example, you find out that Angie has been stripping because she's trying to be a guardian for her nephew, and she's trying to provide for him. And so often, whenever you have a character or a movie that's doing any kind of sex work, it's because there has to be some kind of like higher noble cause for them to be doing it, or they're doing it to pay their way through school, all of which might be reasons why people will do sex work, but some people do it just because they like doing it and they're good at it. So kind of lying on that, it's a little tropey. But that being said, I think by the end of it, we're definitely on Angie's side. We're on Sally's side, not because she's a right-wing nut, but because of some of the realization she makes through that. So, all of this again winds up being a little bit trite, but I think its heart is in the right place.
Yeah, and that's interesting what you brought up. Yeah, with the sex work, is that in a lot of cases we do see where like I'm doing it because I have to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm I don't want to be doing it. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like I'm doing it to pay for my degree, type stuff. But yeah, and it's interesting because this movie's set in, I believe, '87. It's in 1980 Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, and it does have that aesthetic. It doesn't have, but the message, it feels like, is very now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could, they don't have cell phones, but aside from that, I mean, it could have been now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you had told me it was a modern day movie, I wouldn't have questioned it.
Which does go to, again, my squabble of filmmakers. There are decades besides the 1980s. Like, we're allowed to set movies outside of between 1980 and 1989. I'm a little tapped out on the 80s nostalgia. I do think this was pretty well done. It wasn't, they didn't lean too hard into it. It was kind of more the aesthetic as you're going in, and a little bit as you're coming out. They kind of lean more into it. I did enjoy the tech noir needle drop when you have her stripping montage. It's to a tech noir song. The name escapes me, but it's the one that they did with Tim Capello, who you might know as a saxophone guy from the Lost Boys.
Nah.
So I did enjoy hearing that in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think there is a reason for why so many people, go towards the 80s, besides the fact that maybe they grew up during then, or they have, it's movies that they were inspired by from that point in time, or that took place in the 80s. 80s and 90s are a sweet spot where like we don't have all the tech we have now, but we have some technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what makes it so interesting to people, because if you set it in the 80s or the early 90s, you don't have to worry about the kids having cell phones. You don't have to worry about everything being on the internet, but like, government organizations, they can have technology. Like if you really needed them to have some kind of tech, they would. If you set it in, set in 1970, you're not really going to have too many computers.
And I do also understand too, there's a degree to which like it's easier to establish an 80s aesthetic because a lot of people will have kind of a shared vision of what the 1980s looked and sounded like. Lots of neon, lots of kind of pinks and purples, lots of synth music, whereas you don't necessarily have that for like the 1970s or the 1990s. There are things that remind you of those decades, but I don't think people have that same kind of aesthetic shorthand. So I understand the pull to go back to the 80s because it is such a distinct way to kind of get your look across. But as I'm seeing more people start to poke into the 90s, I want to kind of keep pulling people towards that way.
Yeah, that's why whenever I create something, it's gonna be in the 90s or the 70s. I like the 70s too, but it's interesting because as we get older, as I was complaining about the 70s earlier, but as we get older, it's gonna be like now. I had this conversation regarding music. Like I can tell you movies of every like decade, like going to like 1920s, what do you call it, tens, whatever. Like I know movies from that period, so when I see it, I can be like, oh, it's this or this. So I can usually tell like when the movie takes place, or even just with a clip, hearing that how they're speaking, or if they're speaking, because it might be silent. But music throws me off. I have a tough time being like, this is a song from the 30s, and this is a song from the 40s. I can tell you almost every decade, but I would have a tough time with like pop music of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and being able to arrange them. And I think people are going to have those kinds of problem with movies, especially like if you look at like kids growing up now, it's like show them a horror movie from the 60s and 70s, and it might all look the same to them. To us, probably not.
Yeah, we can catch enough of the nuance to be able to tell, like, oh, this, looks like it's a little bit older, probably from the 60s, something like that. But again, you show anyone, I feel like you show anyone at any age something that's supposed to take place in the 80s, and they will very quickly pick up that it's the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I think like, as I said, the 60s, if we're able to, I think if we can establish hippies and 70s disco, but you really got to like lean into that,
Yeah.
that like and you kind of got, and in that case, which kind of goes back to like Stranger Things, is you kind of have to overdo it, I guess, so that people know what decade you're in and what feel you're trying to accomplish. And even because we would have had these same conversations, by the way, and I've said this before, we would have had these same conversations about movies in the 80s, because movies in the 80s that were showing the 1980s, they were more like the 1950s, because that's when those directors were like kids, or like the 50s, like 60s. So like a lot of the stuff we see in the 80s, I'm thinking of like maybe like Night of the Creeps and, and other movies like that, they feel very much like, even though they're set in the 80s, they have like a feel of like the kids are in the 50s.
And I think that's probably partially because of where the directors are kind of pulling from their childhoods, but you're also looking at you're hitting kind of the Reagan era, where it's that nostalgia for going back to the 50s. So you have people who are either responding to that but in kind, and kind of doing it as a way to go back to that kind of aesthetic and those sensibilities, or you have the people who are doing it as kind of like to subvert it and to remind people that like, hey, the 50s kind of sucked for a lot of people.
Yeah. And maybe like I said, that's what we're dealing with now, but I'm all for moving more into the 90s. Give me some more grunge.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm for it.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Revealer is on Shudder, but also it's going to be screening soon. And Brian, I'll have you tell our listeners about it.
So, our friends from Fright Gown, who you might remember last year, Kay Lynch from Salem Horror and Joe Lipset from the Horror Queers, came together to kind of put together a virtual prom, for kind of giving us a virtual horror event for those of us who were missing them because we were inside because of COVID. And so this year, they're doing something a little bit different. They're doing Fright Gown Summer, which is going to be a series of watch parties. And it's starting on July 13th and going right on through August 17th. And they're kind of doing a double feature with either movies created by queer filmmakers, or in some way incorporating queer themes. So, for example, they're kicking off on July 13th with So Vam, who that is actually, it's a really kind of amazing thing. It was created by a teenage transgender girl. I think like 16 years old when she put it together.
Yeah.
And this is a movie that it's like, I remember how like I was useless at 16 years old. Like I was just like getting through the day and like going to football practice. So the fact that this girl put together a feature length movie, and it's really good. Like, it's obviously a debut feature with a little bit of a limited budget, but what she does with it is pretty fantastic. So, a lot of what you're going to see is that kind of stuff where it's going to be, smaller indie queer fronts or forward-facing movies. Revealer will be one of them. So on July 20th, that's going to be with Children of Sin, and then Revealer will be the second one of that double feature. So definitely check out the series. If you go to frightgownsummer.com, you get to see the full lineup. It is free to attend. You'll just need to make sure you have some way of viewing the movies, because it'll be kind of a thing where you'll watch it on your own platform or your own medium, and then you can kind of watch along. And I'm sure they'll be doing like Twitter parties and that kind of thing, so that we can have that communal experience. So for those who enjoyed Fright Gown last year, we get to enjoy some more queer horror this summer.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm glad that team's doing it. And then we got Salem Horror Fest to look forward to, hopefully in person next year. So that's the plan. I mean, they're definitely doing it in person. I just don't know if I'm going to be there. I hope I will, but it's a little too far out right now. Cool. Well, I did want to, I said at the beginning I was going to talk Umbrella Academy, and we're going to talk about Umbrella Academy briefly. because that dropped around the same time as Stranger Things 4 Volume 2. And I've been talking about how much I've loved Umbrella Academy seasons 1 and 2. So I did want to report back. I've seen all of season 3. And for me, season 3 is a bit of a mixed bag. There's some highs, there's some lows. I think for me, one of the things that I've said for people that aren't familiar with the show, for me, it's basically an X-Men TV series. It's based on the Dark Horse comic book, but it features this dysfunctional family of kids, now adults, that have superpowers. And they need to try to save the world. They need to try to, stop the big bad, but all their personal issues get in the way. I think, specifically with the first season, like I think this was a blueprint for if they want to do an X-Men TV show, the direction they need to take it. Because I think also, I think with the X-Men, the Fox movies, they put these like world-ending events front and center. We don't get a lot of that character development. When we do, it's focused on just a handful of characters. And it just doesn't feel like the X-Men comic book series. It's almost like just the highlights. And here you get like 10 episodes a season. And so and it deals a lot with time travel, which obviously X-Men does as well. And so there's a bunch of time travel shenanigans in seasons 1 and 2. The timeline is slightly wonky or a lot wonky. And in season 3, it revolves around this Hotel Obsidian, and our cast of characters have to figure out what's going on, because the Umbrella Academy shows up in a different timeline, and they're not the Umbrella Academy anymore. It's Sparrow Academy, and there are different characters there. And so that's kind of, like I said, the intro to season 3. I think one of the cool things that they did was Elliot Page. They made his character Victor, and they deal with the character's transition in the show. And I think they do it in a way that for me anyway, it felt organic. I think it made sense to also not to address it, but to bring awareness to it. And I think they did that in. It feels like it was organic and not something that was shoehorned in. And so I think they did, hopefully people feel that way, but I feel like they did good by Elliot and by the character Victor. And so I think that's definitely, like I said, one of the highlights. And I think one of the problems I did have with this season, I did love, I do love characters like Klaus, who we see, and as always, he can speak to the dead, he can pull spirits into the real world. And so dealing with this character, kind of learning more about his powers was pretty cool. But I think, one of the big things is, on the opposite side, to what I was saying about the X-Men, is that, in the movies, we see them use their powers. We see these big battles. And I think that the first 2 seasons had a good mix of letting people use their powers, having these really great fight scenes or great action scenes, but then also dealing with the drama and the back and forth with the characters. And I think that balance was a little out of whack this season. And so that was, I think that was, like I said, a little rough. I think this definitely hit there were some bumps on the road with this season. Overall, I still enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to where they go at the next season. But I also think that they face a challenge, kind of like what they did with Game of Thrones, where there's not any more comic book material, at least. The comics came out years ago, the first 2. A third one came out with the hotel a couple of years back, and there is a Sparrow Academy comic book that's supposed to be coming out, but has not been released yet. I believe his name is Gerard Way, lead singer of My Chemical Romance, is the writer of the comic book series. And so he went back to do music, and that's kind of been the main thing. But the downside is we haven't gotten new Umbrella Academy material. And so, and maybe he's given the details to the creative team, and they have it. But also I know it can be challenging when you're kind of, you've had this, maybe you're really good at adapting, but now that you have to figure out the new material and the new arcs for these characters, it can be a little challenging. So I hope they can overcome that for the new season.
I wonder to what degree, and this is one I haven't really gotten to catch up with at all, but I wonder if their decision, it sounds like you're saying they went a little bit more drama and character development this season and not as much in terms of like incorporating like the fight scenes, if I'm understanding what you're
Yeah.
saying. I wonder if that's the reaction to trying to distinguish themselves from like the MCU machine, with all these shows coming out on Disney Plus, that do have those kind of big flashy set pieces. Maybe they figure like, A, we're not going to be able to compete with Marvel budget, and B, like we need to do something that's going to make us like, what how do we be not the X-Men? Maybe they're trying to lean more into this is the more, I don't know, intellectual, kind of like group of mutant stories or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because now that we talked about it, I think it's also that like binge versus having a hook. I think this was, this is designed well as a bingeable show. Watch all 10 episodes as soon as you can. And then maybe you're not as picky about a couple of the slower episodes in between. There's not as many of those like hooks or those really intense moments. By the time you get to the end, it's satisfying and fulfilling. But those individual episodes, some of them not so much. And so I think that's the problem that this one had. And I would say, at least for the first two seasons, they didn't need to worry about Marvel. They were in a class of their own. I was really, really impressed with it. So, but yeah, so anyway, I'm still, like I said, I still didn't enjoy it. I enjoy seeing these characters and where they go, and there's a lot of mystery left to uncover. So I'm curious to see where they take it. Another show that I know we've been watching, and you're one episode up on me, is Only Murders in the Building. It's back.
Season 2, baby.
I don't, maybe I just wasn't paying attention. Maybe I'm not following them on social, but like, it seems like the season, just like snuck in there with like, here's the first two episodes. Like, I think I found out, I think I messaged you like a couple days after it had come out, because I had no idea it was premiering.
I think you might have just missed it. Yeah, I don't think they were being coy, or they weren't being.
It was
too
just
shy
me.
About it.
Then it's just me not paying attention.
Those things will happen. Again, we bang this drum all the time on Corpse Club, but there's so much content. There's so much out there. So the fact that some of it kind of slips under your radar is 100% understandable. But yeah, I think they gave it the same. I don't think they gave it the same like fanfare as the first season, but I think it's they're counting on the people who know about it are going to know about it. I don't think they gave it quite as much marketing as when it was first starting, but it definitely knew it was coming. And I still love this show, at least after the first two episodes. It's the dynamic between the main cast, Steve Martin, Martin Short, and for me, the MVP is Selena Gomez. Is just, they're amazing. I really love the energy she brings to this little trio. For those who are unfamiliar with the show, it's about these three people who are kind of barely acquaintances. They just all happen to live in the same apartment building in Manhattan. They get kind of caught up in this true crime, this murder in their building, and they just start to develop a true crime podcast about it, while also being involved in it themselves. And so after the first season, it gets wrapped up. They figure out who done it. There's I think some pretty good twists and turns for how they get there. But just as kind of they're celebrating, the cliffhanger at the end is that Selena Gomez's character Mabel gets found in her apartment with the kind of the dying and bloody body of Bunny, who was the condo board president and kind of a pain in the ass. And so they're getting clearly set up to take the fall for this. And so when we catch up with them at the beginning of this season, they get arrested, but they get questioned, and the cops basically say, like, we don't have anything to actually arrest you, but stay in town, and whatever you do, don't start don't investigate this, don't do a true crime podcast about it. And so the first thing they do is to start investigating it and start a true crime podcast about it. Season 2 of Only Murders in the Building, while they're also being the subject of from the first season, Tina Fey plays like this. I don't know how you kind of the established true crime podcaster of this universe.
Yeah.
She's decided that she's going to do a podcast with them as the subjects, and she's kind of centering them as the chief suspects. And so, they're even more embroiled in this whole thing than they were with the first mystery. Honestly, I don't really care as much about the mystery. I'm just in it to watch Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. My wife also really enjoys this, but she said it's funny. I don't think they really know, or maybe even really care exactly how true crime podcasts are structured. It's not necessarily one of those shows that you're going to love because of all the in jokes and nods to true crime podcasts, which I guess isn't super surprising considering Steve Martin was one of the co-creators, and he strikes me as someone who was probably learning about these things as he was going. But for me, it just doesn't matter because I really just love these characters so much, and it's just so damn funny.
Yeah, it's amazing to me too that we were talking earlier about splitting seasons up. This takes place, moments after the end of season 1. And because they filmed it so quickly, and because they had a good budget for the first season, it's not like their hair and makeup and wardrobe change. It's not like they've aged significantly. So it kind of is just it immediately picks up. For somebody that is watching it, you may not realize it's a season, ender and opener. Mm-hmm. And might just think that it keeps going. And in some cases that might not be a great thing. Here it is, because it's more of what we loved in the first season. And yeah, it's great. It's wonderful to watch. This is one of those things where, I'm opposite of what I said for Umbrella Academy, but I'm happy to just watch these characters. I agree with you. I don't care as much about the murders and where they go with it. I just want to see how these characters handle those situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is definitely a show that rewards the episodic release. Hulu is pretty big on doing the weekly releases, and this is a show that really leans into that, because I think pretty much every episode ends on a cliffhanger of some kind. So they know what they're doing with this, and they've got all kinds of fun little gags in there. I think one of my favorites is that when they start the show, they'll do the cold open, they'll do the credits, and then the title card or the episode card will be in the form of a podcast. And if you look at the bottom, the timestamp, you'll know how long the episode's going to be, because it's set up like a podcast screen where you can see how long it is, but it's also 5 or 6 minutes into the podcast at that point, because that's how far you are into the episode. It's a small thing, but for some reason that just tickles me.
Yeah, no, it is pretty clever.
With it being so early, I really don't want to get much into details or even any spoilers that have come up, but I will just say, if you liked the first season, and if you're in it for this trio, you're going to get more of that, and you're definitely going to enjoy it. If you haven't seen it yet and you like either Steve Martin, Martin Short, or Selena Gomez, or any combination of those three, you will enjoy the show.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you haven't watched it, start watching immediately. This was one of my favorite releases. I think I put this on my favorites list, or you did, or we both did.
I think we both did.
Yeah, I think we both did. So yeah, well, with that, this episode of Corpse Club comes to an end. Hopefully we talked about a few things, or a couple of things you haven't seen. And we talked about Stranger Things Volume 4, or Stranger Things 4 Volume 2. We talked about Revealer on Shudder, and Umbrella Academy on Netflix, and Only Murders in the Building is on Hulu. We want to thank Brian, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode. And of course, we always want to thank our Corpse Club listeners, especially those of you who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. Make sure to visit corpseclub.com. You can check out our latest episode and our back catalog. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Every rating and review helps. You can also find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, all of your favorite podcast providers. If you want to get in touch, you can reach out anytime. We're at contact@corpseclub.com, or on Twitter, we're at Daily Dead News, we're at Corpse Club, and on Instagram and Facebook, we're under Corpse Club as well. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay scary.